Welcome back. We're talking about World War I. We're going to kind of shift more towards world between wars. So we're going to talk about events that took place after World War I, but before World War II. And we're going to focus mostly on communism in Russia. So you have the Russian Civil War. So Vladimir Lenin, as we said earlier, came to power in Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution or the October Revolution and signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, ending Russian participation in World War I. After leaving World War I, Russia began fighting a 3-year civil war, mostly between the Reds, which would be the communists or the Bolsheviks. These people support Vladimir Lenin. And then you have the Whites, those who oppose the revolution. Now you have other different factions fighting against the communists as well, but these are the two main ones we're going to focus on. Over 8 million people died as a result of the Russian Civil War, which is actually more deaths than Russia suffered in World War I. And if you remember correctly, or if you remember back to the last lesson, or the beginning of the lesson, Russia had the most casualties of any country in World War I, despite leaving a year early. One of the people who died in the Russian Revolution was Tsar Nicholas II, Tsar Nicholas Romanov, and the Romanov family. Him and his family were taken prisoner during the Civil War, and they were taken into an underground bunker and shot by a firing squad by the Communist Party. And this includes most of his family, who died, immediate family. There was rumors about Anastasia and Alexei escaping. However, those were proven false in the 1990s. But the legend of Anastasia continues to stay. There's been several movies and plays written about her escape and fictional stories about that, and some people actually claiming to be Anastasia. Well, the Russian Civil Wars led to Vladimir Lenin coming to charge, and it lasted 3 years before the Russians or the Reds, the communists, won the Civil War. Vladimir Lenin's going to set up a communist government in Russia. Russia becomes known as the Soviet Union, and Lenin is going to become leader of the Soviet Union until his death in 1924. And the picture on the left here, you can actually see a modern day picture of Vladimir Lenin. So they've actually kept his body through plastic surgery and other measures alive and on display for people to see. Vladimir Lenin was replaced by Joseph Stalin after a competition between Stalin and many other people, most notably Leon Trotsky. Now, Leon Trotsky was leader of the Red Army during the Russian Civil War. Several years later, Trotsky criticized Stalin. Stalin is a very paranoid person. He is someone who is very ruthless, and Stalin actually had Trotsky tracked down in Mexico City and had him murdered using an axe pick. So Stalin was very ruthless. He had lots of enemies, and he also had a lot of perceived enemies, all of which he wanted to get rid of. But Stalin's first job or first responsibility after he gained power and got rid of his enemies was industrializing Russia. So Russia did not have enough industrial power in World War I to provide their troops with weapons and supplies. So Stalin really wants to change that in case another war comes up. And he set up a series of 5-year plans, each lasting approximately 5 years, to make the Soviet Union into a modern industrialized country by improving manufacturing, transportation, and then eventually weapon production. He also changed agriculture because they needed some way to feed these workers. You can see Stalin's picture there on the left, as well as a picture of the railroad, which he made huge improvements on as leader of the Soviet Union. So Stalin brought all manufacturing and agriculture under the government control, and there was a lot of consequences if you didn't meet these targets that he set, which were very difficult to reach. Factory managers who did not meet their production targets were executed as enemies of the people. Factory workers who did not reach these targets could be sent to labor camps in Siberia. For farmers, their land, farm equipment, and animals were turned over to the government, and farmers were forced to live on state-owned farms. You had millions of kulaks, who are peasant farmers who owned land and equipment and actually had reasonable wealth under Vladimir Lenin. They're arrested for criticizing or going against the orders of Joseph Stalin. We'll learn more about this later, but they were arrested, exiled, or killed for resisting his agricultural policies, which for the most part, his agricultural policies largely failed. Stalin, as I said earlier, was one of the most ruthless dictators in world history. He's responsible for the death of over 20 million of his own people, which actually places him second in the most responsible deaths for a dictator, behind Mao Zedong in China. In order to ensure obedience, Stalin's Communist Party used secret police, censorship, violent purges, and terror, and anyone who went against him, as you can see here, was generally murdered. One example of this took place in the Great Purge, where you had Stalin murdering anyone he believed was a threat to him. And this picture here is Sergei Kirov, who was Stalin's most loyal supporter. However, Sergei Kirov became too popular, and Stalin worried that his popularity would lead him to want more power, and Stalin most likely had him assassinated, but he framed other people, other enemies of his, to gain even more power. So who was targeted in the Great Purge? You have political rivals, you have army officials, you have church clergy, and not all these people were necessarily against Stalin, but anyone who might potentially pose a threat to Stalin. So some of his supporters were actually targeted as well if they were popular. Stalin got rid of religion in Russia. He tore down churches and religious symbols and really made himself out to be kind of the supreme leader and replacing religion with himself, similar to what you saw a little bit in the French Revolution. Another important topic that took place for Stalin, or important event, is the Holodomor. The Holodomor took place in the early and mid 1930s in mostly the Ukraine. He's responsible for a man-made famine known as the Holodomor, which means death by starvation. So you might recognize the holo parts. Think of the Holocaust, which means death by fire. This means death by starvation. Stalin purposely and systematically starved about 7 million people. However, the true number we don't know for sure because much of this was hidden. So most of these people died in Ukraine. You can see the children hiding here. You have examples of cannibalism. Here, one story I heard was a mother actually shoving her children into an oven because they had starved to death and she herself was starving. You also have stories of mothers feeding their children their family pet, such as a cat, and not really telling them what they were eating. But you had millions and millions of people starving, and this wasn't because they didn't have food. They had plenty of food, but Stalin confiscated their food and surrounded their villages with military personnel and did not let any food get in or out of the village. Those who spoke about the famine were executed, so most people had to deny it, even if your family members were affected by it. Stalin went very far into covering up a lot of these things and a lot of his secrets. As we said, anyone who spoke about the Holodomor could be executed. Most people denied it, even if they suffered from it. And then you also have victims removed from public records and hired artists to remove victims from photographs. I have more information on this if you watch the bonus video, Roots of Evil, between Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. And you can see this picture here at the bottom of the screen. So I have the split picture on the left, and I have two separate pictures down below the writing. And you can see Joseph Stalin walking, and it's the same picture, but you'll notice the person to Stalin's left is missing. And what happened here is Stalin had this person murdered, and he had him erased from history, including historical pictures. So a lot of the information about the Great Purge is missing. I had a student one time try to write a research paper about the Great Purge, but she got very frustrated early on because she had trouble finding names of victims and things that actually happened because of the detail that Joseph Stalin went into to keeping this a secret. All right, next we're talking about fascism in Italy and Benito Mussolini. Thank you.